This is When I Grow Up with Paul Glazby.
Leon, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Student, lawyer, politician. But what did you want to be when you grew up?
None of those things, to be honest.
Okay.
So I think I was one of those people who went through a few different phases in life as a child, wanting to do different things when I got older. When I was really little, I wanted to be a chef. I used to call it a cooker,
Okay.
at the time. And I went through a phase of wanting to become a teacher. I think that was probably next because I enjoyed lecturing people around me, some of my fellow students. But I had a lot of admiration for my teachers at the time, and it was something that I thought of doing. As I got towards the end of my high school, I think I was very interested in journalism.
Okay.
I thought there was some incredible opportunities to travel, I enjoyed debating, and I liked the idea of being exposed to public speaking and being involved in some very topical issues as well.
Yep.
And then I still remember speaking to an English teacher at the time, and she said to me that at the time journalism was it was a great profession, but it was very hard to find jobs. And that was at the point in my education when I was trying to line up what I was going to do after school and jobs. And so I ended up deciding not to go down that path, but then I looked at medicine and law. I used to watch, I don't know if you remember the old TV show in Australia, All Saints, but it was a medical TV show.
Flying Doctors, that's the only one I know.
Probably something similar, I'm not sure. And anyway, so it was something that I was interested in and getting into the medical field.
Yep.
And in the end, I was tossing up between that and going down the law path. And it wasn't because I was incredibly passionate about law at the time. It was because I wanted to make sure I had options available, and having a law degree was great in terms of you could go down a whole range of different paths. So I ended up going down that path, and in year 11, year 12, I had a bit of not really a crisis, but I thought, okay, I want to sort of express a bit more of the creative side. And I even went and did some of the NIDA courses and went down sort of dabbled in a bit of acting.
Okay.
And
Well, it helps with the public speaking, I'm sure.
well, some people make some analogies between politics and acting, which is probably not wise. But anyway, I think those were some of the things. But I ended up getting to the end of year 12, and I thought, okay, I decided in the end that medicine wasn't the route I wanted to take.
Yep.
And I managed to get into law school, and I thought, let's give it a go.
Right. Okay. And from our sort of brief conversations in the past, you were telling me, because you've studied in quite a few, so if it goes like the sort of student part of your time, so just run us through how that unfolded.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had quite a diverse education. So I started at a private school, and then I finished at a public school. I studied the International Baccalaureate at the time, as well as the Australian tertiary education system. So I ended up studying overseas as part of that. I did a number of exchange programs and received a scholarship to study overseas as well. So I did most of my education in Australia, but I had the opportunity to study in France. I was really interested in French language, and I asked them to send me somewhere in France where no one spoke English. So they sent me to rural Normandy. Okay. And I went to part of year 11, year 12 there, which was the best experience I've ever had for an exchange.
Could you speak French by the time you left?
By the time I left, I could, absolutely. When I got there, it was very, very few. I could speak a few words, but the sentences and the sentence structure was quite challenging at the time. I think the French teacher in France, at the school in France, was quite surprised when she realised I hadn't actually studied French for that long at the time, and was thrown in and immersed in in the French language. But it was the best experience, honestly.
A friend of mine, Ben, he went because he wanted to learn Spanish, so he went and lived in Spain for a year, just basically that to immerse himself. And he was in Barcelona, and just by chance, I ended up in Barcelona for a few days doing like this fitness convention. Because as well I had the gyms and stuff. So I was over there, so I caught up with him, and we went out for dinner one night, and we sat, and the waiter came to the table, and he's obviously trying to practice his Spanish, and then this waiter looked at me a bit funny and walked away. And then Ben said, "Oh, I think I just told him that you love him." I was like, "Okay." More lessons, Ben. More lessons.
Yeah, I've had a few. There was
Mishaps.
when I went to the host family that I was staying with in France. I've had a few issues where I asked them to pass me things across the dinner table, and the words that I used were very inappropriate words. I found out afterwards. So they said, "No, that's not the word. You better rephrase that." So there were some times, but I'm sure every exchange student has had that. And so after I studied in France, I was back in Australia for a while. I studied in the Netherlands for a bit. And I did a lot of international law courses and some European Union law courses.
Right.
Not far from Amsterdam, so in Utrecht, at Utrecht Law School. And I did that for quite a while, and I also had the opportunity to study in China, which was very different to everything else. Yeah, so there was something called the International Alliance of Research Universities, and I was one of the 2 students that the Australian University, or the Australian National University, sent over. Okay. And we studied a course which I'm sure they'd never allow to be taught in China again. It was called Major Issues Concerning the Rise of China. And it was taught by a professor from Cornell University in the United States. Right. But
that guy's dead now.
I hope not. But phenomenal experience. Just great. And I'd always say to people, if you haven't, especially to young people, if you haven't had the opportunity, go overseas. Study overseas, work overseas. It just means when you come back to Australia, you bring so much experience and you see things so differently as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky with the DJ and I got to travel. I didn't get to spend long in each place, but I remember once I got back and I was complaining that because I'd just been to, I can't remember exactly what it was, but let's say I'd had a week in America, got back, had a few days at home, flown to South Africa, got back, and then I was heading off. Or maybe I was coming to Australia, I can't remember. But I was complaining about it. And my wife at the time, Rachel, her dad, Dave, he said, "You do realise you've been more places in the world this year than I've been in my life." Yeah. He's like, just don't take it for granted. Like, stop complaining. I'm like, it really made me think, I need to recalibrate a little bit.
And I think, and as Australians, we are pretty well travelled as a population, and I was very fortunate to have parents who put a lot of investment into making sure that I was able to see as much of the world as we could. My mum's family is mostly in America at the moment, and my dad's family is mostly in India. Right. So growing up, for the first sort of 18 years, we'd go between the 2 places. Right. And that it does make you think about things more broadly. Yeah.
It's interesting though, because like Australia, like America, a lot of Americans don't have passports, but they don't need them because you can sort of experience everything within America. And Australia is like that to a degree. I mean, you can go skiing, you can go to beach holidays, you can go snorkel, whatever you want to do. But like you're right, Australians are more travellers. Yeah.
It could also be because we're so far away from everything. There's so much we want to see and want to experience, and we consume a lot of foreign media, foreign TV, foreign movies. Yeah. And so, we see all those places overseas, which is why we need to do that in Australia as well, so that other people want to come here.
Well, yeah, that's right, yeah. But the interesting thing from my point of view as well, when I first started coming to Australia, which would have been 23, so it's like nearly 25 years ago, but all the TV shows that we had in England, like it was like we were the Columbus. We were bringing, check this TV show out. They'd never seen it. Obviously, the internet's sort of progressed everything so much that I'm sure everything's kind of leveled out. Right. But I just remember coming like the fashion and people's awareness of TV shows or music. It was Australia seemed like a bit behind England, but I'm sure that's not the case anymore. But I do remember that being like the. Yeah.
And I think with how the media's changed and how we consume media, everything's, you look at movies, we used to have to wait for movies after they'd been released in America. Everything happens almost instantaneous now. So
especially for Matt.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
It's progressed fairly quickly, so which is great for us as consumers.
Yeah, for sure. So, France, Netherlands, China, and is that the last sort of?
And Australia.
And obviously Australia, yeah. So then you become a lawyer? Because you're only 29, aren't you?
Yeah, so I'm 29.
Youngest guest so far on the When I Grow Up podcast, yeah.
Well, so yes, I'm 29, and I did a lot of that study and travel while I was doing other things. So while I was working, I was doing my law degree from about 2013 to 2018, and I think the China and the Netherlands exchanges occurred during that time.
Right.
So I was becoming qualified as a lawyer at that period of time, and by the time I was actually practicing as a lawyer, I'd completed all those trips.
Right. Okay. And then you joined a firm here on the Gold Coast, or were you?
So I actually started with a firm in Canberra. So a very large Australian international law firm, and the way it works with law is towards the end of your law degree, you do what's referred to as a clerkship. It's almost an internship with a law firm, and I managed to get into this law firm. I did a clerkship probably around I think it was the 4th year of university, and then came on as a graduate afterwards. But I ended up deferring because of politics. But I had the opportunity to experience law in Canberra and then transferred up to the Brisbane office, and then most recently I've been working remotely from the Gold Coast, because a lot of my clients are based overseas. They're based around the country, and as needed I travel to Brisbane or to Canberra.
Right. And the law you do is?
So I specialise in foreign investment law, so it's a very niche part of Australia's legal system. So it's, in effect, inbound investment into Australia. Can be in multiple forms. It can be in real estate. It can be in shares in an entity, for example. So you'd probably be familiar with FIRB clauses in contracts. So another way of saying a foreign investment lawyer is a FIRB lawyer.
Right.
So we would review those contracts. We'd review the clauses. We'd make sure that the investments are within the national interest test and the national security test for Australia. So part of it is residential real estate, but part of it's also commercial. You've also got agricultural, and it's just making sure that whatever the investments are align with the national interest, and then being, I guess, the conduit between the client and the Australian government and the Department of the Treasury.
Right. Okay. So I'm not sure if this is anything like it, but there's a lot of talk about where in America where the Chinese have bought a lot of the land and stuff.
Yeah.
Some people are saying it's probably not in the best interest of the country.
Yeah. So look, I mean,
trying to avoid things like that.
It's the most common thing people say. It's about is it people from a particular country wanting to come and buy up part of Australia, and it's saying that Australia's actually, our foreign investment system is among the, if not the most advanced, it's among the most advanced in the world. And countries, even, for example, the UK, are a couple of years behind us, I'd say.
That doesn't surprise me.
And so I actually, there's a lot of myths around foreign investment. It's very easy to say, for example, the Chinese are buying up Australia, which is not necessarily true. If you look at Australia's investment, we receive a lot of investment from a range of different countries. I think the United States is by far the number one.
Right.
You've got the UK, I think, at number two. You've, the Belgians, the French, the Canadians, Singaporeans. There's a lot of other countries that I'd say would invest significantly.
I was just using that as an example.
No, exactly. And so, but it's the same concept, which you're right. It's when you've got foreign interests buying land in Australia, and it's us just making sure that fits within both the national interest test but also national security. So we don't want to allow critical infrastructure assets to be sold to foreign government entities, for example, if they don't fit the national security test, or they haven't matched up to the national interest test. And the Australians, and to their credit, the last government, I think it was under the Morrison government, they changed a lot of those rules to make sure that Australia's interests are protected.
Right.
And that's why we've got such a strong system here now.
Okay, good. And then you told me you got into law because of real estate. What was the story there? You were saying about your parents?
Yes, that was more the reason I got into politics.
Oh, sorry, politics.
As opposed to into law. So I'll give you a bit of background. So I was born in Canberra. My parents migrated there a couple of years before I was born, and they were from Goa in India. You might have heard of it, party capital. If you're a DJ, yeah. So there's a Portuguese colony in India, and both mum and dad were from there. They came to Australia and settled in Canberra, and then I was born. And they both had full-time jobs, and they still do. So mum's with the public service, and dad's a tradie. He's an electrician by trade. And the way they, I guess, tried to secure their future, it was all about, put in the hard work now and hopefully reap the reward down the track. And that's the way I was raised, work hard, strong work ethic. And what they said was they decided to invest in real estate. Yep. And part of that was, to make sure that when they retired or they got to the retirement age, they didn't want to have to rely on the government. Yeah. And they didn't want me to have to, go without and not go to, the universities that I would perhaps have wanted to go to because they weren't able to afford it. And so they had a rental property which we all used to do up before school, after school. We would, go and put the work in. We'd do the floorboards, we'd do the tiling, we'd do the painting.
Have you got brothers and sisters?
No, it's just me. Yeah. And they also had another side business on the weekends as well, which was a sort of a little family business. And I saw the way that the government in the ACT, which was a Labor government at the time, treated people who tried to put in the extra effort to get ahead for them and their families. And I think I saw firsthand quite an imbalance in the system for when it came to business owners, when it came to landlords, when it came to a whole range of different people at the time. And it really frustrated me because we should as a country be wanting to encourage aspiration. We want to encourage people to say, you know what, if you're going to put in the work, if you're going to, do what needs to be done, you should be able to be rewarded for it. And that's the way we lift the whole country, I think. And that was part of the reason that I decided to go into politics, because there's no better place to change a lot of the government's approach than from being in government. Yeah. Good. I like it. So you obviously you were practicing law in Brisbane and then remotely. And at what point did you then end up where you are now, which is you tell me. It's a bit of a mouthful. So I'm the LNP candidate for Macpherson, so the Liberal National Party federal candidate for Macpherson. So the Gold Coast is divided into 3 federal seats in Parliament. So there's a House of Representatives seats, and my area is the southern Gold Coast, so Merrimack, Robina, right down to the border. Coolangatta. Yeah. Okay. And so to answer your question, how did I end up here? It's a very good question. It's a long story, which I'll try and condense.
Okay, we've got time.
So when I was at uni, so go back to end of 2013, I was towards the end of my first year of law school. I had a few jobs. I worked at Chemist Warehouse as a pharmacist assistant for a number of years. I was working for the ANU Disability Services. I used to do private tutoring after school for, school students. And I decided it was exam period one year. So it was the end of my first year of law. We had the first year law exams. And I saw one of my friends, we were at the library, one of the libraries at the university, and she had up on her screen this job application for what was called a parliamentary assistant in the House of Representatives. And I thought, that looks good. It's about time I get a job that looks more professional. And a lot of friends had picked up jobs in law firms and I hadn't. And so I said to her, do you mind if I apply for that? Anyway, long story short, I applied for it, went through the process and ended up becoming a parliamentary assistant in the Department of the House of Representatives. Right. Now, what does that all mean? It sounds like a lot. If you ever watch the House of Representatives, I'm sure you've got better things to do, but if you ever bored and you watch it, you'll see that there are some guys and girls in green jackets, and they'll go around pouring water for a lot of the politicians. They facilitate the proceedings in the chamber. They will take notes from one to the other, from the advisors to the ministers. And so I picked up that job, and I started my second year of university in that job as well, alongside full-time university. So I was working very long hours, and but I loved it. I loved all of a sudden being in the centre of Australian politics and having some sort of an observatory role, because I could sit there and listen and watch. And it was during that time you couldn't be political. You had to work with all parties and all individuals. And I kind of thought, let me actually use this as an opportunity to absorb a lot of what's being said. And after sitting there for a while, I realised where I sat politically. And for me, it was to be involved with the Liberal National Party, or the Liberal Party in the ACT and in New South Wales. And there were a few really key things that appealed to me that I heard, and I saw the way.
Can you share?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really goes to values, and I think in politics we're not as accustomed to speak to values anymore. We used to be, and if you look at a lot of older political leaders, there was a lot more talk about values. So, it's the idea of a government or individuals fighting for lower taxes, for less regulation, for the importance of the family unit, for wanting smaller government. It's the idea of wanting to make sure that government does stay out of people's lives, that we encourage aspiration, and very importantly, it's personal responsibility. And that goes from, if you drop a piece of paper, you pick it up, through to if you want to buy a new car, you work for it, and you should be rewarded for it. And so, personal responsibility was a very big thing for me, and it was part of the reason the way I was raised.
Yeah. I was just thinking something I saw on Instagram yesterday, which kind of speaks to that. It was saying about the importance of I'm going to cock this up. It was basically about how important it is for when people put the shopping trolley away.
Yeah,
because there was this thing. It was I think it was Glenn Danzig who'd written it. It was there was a heavy metal band called Danzig in the 80s, I think it was 70s, 80s, or whatever. And I think it was him, Glenn Danzig, that had written it. And it goes on about how there's no laws around putting the shopping trolley away. You can just leave it. There's not going to be any penalty, but it just speaks to the type of person you are. Absolutely. I think there should be the death penalty. If you leave a shopping trolley in the middle of a parking lot, it should carry the death penalty.
It frustrates me.
It annoys the hell out of me.
It absolutely does.
It takes 2 seconds to do. Yeah. Just do it. So
it's about wanting to make sure that as individuals we're contributing positively to society. Right? Everyone's got different talents and different issues as well, but I think there are a few basic principles and values that have stood humanity in a good stead for a long time, and I think individual and personal responsibility is so important, and that was one of the things that won me over with the Liberal Party.
Well, that's what really annoyed me. I was my dad is probably not the best person in terms of he's like an older generation, so he looks at things. He was having a rant about Polish immigrants one of the times I went back to England, saying about how they take all the jobs. And I'm like, it's not that they take all the jobs. A lot of the English people just don't want to do the work. These Polish people have just got a better work ethic. They come across and they get the jobs because a lot of the English people don't want to do it. And the English government, in my opinion, have systematically incentivized people to be lazy. Like if you can be on the dole and get, and my dad was like, oh, but there's not enough work. And we were stood in his kitchen and I was looking across, and in the bushes, the neighbours' bushes, there was litter. Yeah. I'm like, there's a job there. While ever there's litter in the streets, there's a job for someone to do. Why are we giving people handouts to do nothing? But a lot of these people that are like on the dole, they've got brand new Nikes on. They've got they can afford cigarettes and alcohol. That's not right, for the people that are willing to put the effort in, like you. You should be rewarded, and we should have things in place for people that are in a position that they can't do the stuff. Some people may have a disability or whatever, but don't incentivize people to be lazy. It's bananas.
Yeah, and I think that there's a few things in that, but firstly, you know, Australia needs a social system, a social welfare system, and there are, as you say, there are people who, for whatever reason, they're unable to work, or you know, they've had some really bad luck at times as well. And as a country, I think we've got the financial ability to provide for that to a certain extent. But I was always raised to believe that government support is an absolute last resort, right? And where possible, we should be as individuals working hard to ensure that we guarantee our own futures. And it's going to become really important for us as a country as well, because you look at the state of the economy in Australia, we've got a number of significant issues. We've got insane amounts of debt at a federal level. And we're going to get to a position as a country where we're going to have to make some really difficult decisions. So unless we're making the tough decisions sometimes now, we're going to actually set up a very bad future for us down the track and for our kids and for their kids. And I think it's so important that we do raise children and raise a culture in this country of saying, yeah, you know, put in the work, put in the effort, and you'll get rewarded. And for those who, for whatever reason, are unable to do that, there is a system, but it's a last resort.
Yeah, true story. So, obviously you're the LNP for essentially the Southern Gold Coast.
Correct.
Obviously you're wanting to be, voted in.
Yeah, so the current MP is Karen Andrews, who's been the MP for a number of years, and she's also an LNP representative. Karen's announced her retirement, and I was pre-selected in April this year by the Liberal National Party to be the next candidate for Macpherson. So I'm obviously pending an election, which I suspect will be very early next year. But should I be elected, then I'd step into the role of the LNP member for Macpherson to represent the voice of the Southern Gold Coast in Canberra.
Cool. So what are your, if you had to convince me that you're the guy to vote for, what are the 3 things that you would say to me that are important to you?
Yeah, and so look, Paul, I've been out around the community for a number of years, but intensely as a candidate since May this year. So I stopped, and a lot of people don't realise the sacrifice that goes into politics sometimes. I stopped my job, I've gone on leave from being a lawyer in May this year, which means I don't get paid as a candidate and I don't get paid as a lawyer, right? And that will be the case until the next election. So I've used that opportunity to make sure I'm out amongst the Southern Gold Coast community as much as possible. So I've been doing listening posts this morning. I was at Kira Beach, then I went to the Gold Coast Professionals Hub at the Currumbin Sanctuary. I've got about 4 or 5 events tomorrow, and I've been doing listening posts just about every day since May. I've been doing door knocking, I've been doing sign waving you might see on the side of the roads, and I've been doing a whole range of community forums and community events. And you've asked for 3 things, but I'll give you one. And part of my job is, yes, I want to put forward a vision for the country in the long run. And I think in politics, often we've been in this situation where people are looking and political leaders are looking election cycle to election cycle, as opposed to where do we want to see our country 15, 20, 30 years down the track. And there are other countries who do that 100 years in advance, right? So Australia should be doing the same thing. So there are lots of broader ideas that I've got, but there is one pressing issue at the moment, which is what I've learned from all of the constant feedback that I'm getting from people in my interactions with people, and that is people are hurting, businesses are hurting, and I'm talking about financially, and that results in other pressures in your life as well, because if you've got financial economic pressure, it affects relationships, it affects people's mental health, and it's because of cost of living. And there's no doubt that it's the number one issue, and it will be the number one issue for some time now. So how do we actually address cost of living, and what is it? You've got a few different parts of it. You've got housing, right? There's a lot of young people who can't afford their first home. And we have been a country where home ownership is so important. The Liberal National Party is the party of home ownership. If you look at how the Liberal Party was started, it was started on the concept of wanting to enable people to buy their first home. And we've got the land in this country. We are overwhelmingly quite a wealthy country. If you are individual who works, who has a good full-time job, you're working, you're putting in the effort. If you're someone who is working, there is no reason why you shouldn't be able to have your first home, right? You work for it, you put in the effort. And unfortunately, we're in a situation now in Australia where, for a number of reasons, and we could go into a whole housing podcast, but people
You can always come back, Leon. You can always come back.
Love to. People are struggling to actually achieve that. And that's really disheartening, and it's very sad for a lot of young people. Now, I'm probably, as someone who I think is probably the youngest, if not one of the youngest federal candidates in the country, I'm in a very unique position because in the last 5 years, I've rented, I bought my first home, and I'm renting out to somebody else as well. Yeah. So I've seen it from all three sides. Yeah. And housing is a massive issue. So that's one thing. So we want to address the housing crisis, and I can talk as much as you like to how we do that. The second part of this cost of living issue would be how do we reduce groceries? And part of that is also looking at fuel, right? So that's the cost of everything going up, and that's part of the inflation topic that we speak about. And then the third component would be looking at our energy and looking at power prices. And it's a combination of those three issues, and there are a few other things as well, but those three are the big three that people speak to me about. So my job and what I would like to do is be part of a government that can actually deliver on changes to those three things and those three areas. And that's my focus. That's my immediate focus should I be elected.
Nice. You got my vote.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, mate. Well, I think anyone listening to that, I think would be difficult to argue because you're right. Everybody is.
And look, part of it is listening to people, right? It's very hard to represent people if you haven't not only been listening to them, but if you haven't been listening to them for a long time and been a part of the community for a long time. Now, most people on the Southern Gold Coast would have, if they're the type of people to go to community events and stuff, they've probably met me or seen me at community events because I've been quite prolific in what I go to, and I go to a lot. So part of it is listening, but part of it is also, okay, everyone can talk about how we want to address these things. There are very few people who are in a position to be able to deliver on them. And the way it works in federal politics in Australia is in order to deliver meaningful change, in order to change legislation, in order to attract incredible funding to the Gold Coast. You know, you look at the Gold Coast, we're going to see generational change. Look at the population growth that's forecast here. We've already seen it, right? And so we need someone who's able to deliver the generational infrastructure that's required for the Gold Coast. We need someone who's able to deliver the infrastructure that's going to be required ahead of the Olympics in 2032. And we need someone who's going to be able to deliver the housing infrastructure that's required for the increased population. So the only people who can do that, and this is where I say quite comfortably in this seat, only the Liberal National Party can deliver on that, because I can be part of a broader Peter Dutton coalition team that can actually have control of the budget, because they've got a position, you know, they have the opportunity to be elected as government should the Australian people vote that way. And what that means is we can actually secure funding for some of the important projects. You know, you and I have driven up the M1 many times. You've seen some of the work that's going on. The only reason that's been able to happen was because we were able to deliver the funding for it.
Now that section's finished. I get home in 15 minutes. It's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And they've opened 5 lanes near my place, which is great. So, look, it's things like that. It's who's been listening and who can deliver. And that's where I'm uniquely positioned to do that.
It's a bit like real estate, because if I don't listen to people, then, it's like the deals that I put together, 9 times out of 10 is because you're listening to what the buyer wants, you're listening to what the seller needs, and it all comes together.
And you get a lot of, you know, it's definitely not you, but you get a lot of real estate
there's some shonky ones,
who are a bit shonky, and they can make a lot of noise, and they can make a lot of noise, and but they can't actually, you know, they can't actually get you the results you want. And it's the same in politics. There's a lot of people that can make a lot of noise, but they can't actually deliver. And that's the key thing, because at the end of the day, like I said, individuals, businesses, all hurting at the moment. And they want government to actually help them. Government's there to work for the people, not the other way around.
Yeah, well, it doesn't seem like that sometimes, does it? But
especially at the moment. So, yeah.
Well, Leon, thanks for being with us.
No, pleasure.
I'm sure
Thanks for having me.
we'll see you again, and hopefully next time we sit at this table, you're the Macpherson representative.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt.
No, that was good. Thank
Cheers.
you.
This is When I Grow Up with Paul Glazby.